This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good morning. Welcome to back to Energy Visions and to Politico's event on the role of renewables in a world without Russian energy. My name is Jan Chański and I'm a senior policy editor at Politico, and you're watching on Politico Live. The February 24th invasion of Ukraine by Russia showed that it was simply too politically dangerous for the EU to keep relying on Russian exports of coal, oil and gas to keep us fueled, not to mention the ethical problem of sending billions to finance a war criminal. One of the bloc's immediate responses was the RePower EU scheme, which aims to limit or even end that relationship with Russia as fast as possible, something that's being helped as well by Russia turning off the taps to many of its long-term EU customers as well. One of the main goals in the RePower EU scheme is speeding up the adoption of renewables and boosting renovation. These are all projects that were underway in the Green Deal, but now there's sort of an overlay of national security, which makes even worthy but not necessarily enormously exciting projects like building renovation have some of the sort of sexier aspects of national security. You can send howitzers to Ukraine or add styrofoam to your building. It's all part of the cause. The war does raise some key questions that we'll be tackling during the panel. One is, how can the EU most effectively speed up renewables and renovation? We're certainly getting a sense that there's a gap in where we want to be in a couple of years and how to get there during the next couple of years. Is there a role for hydrogen? How can policymakers deal with political tensions around onshore wind? And is there a danger of substituting dependence on Russia for other dependencies, perhaps renewables generated in North Africa, or relying on China for batteries and solar panels? We'll be discussing this and more with our speakers, but first there's some housekeeping remarks. I'd like to thank our partner Shell for making this event possible, and thank you, our audience, for joining us in person and online. We try to make these panels as interactive as possible, and you can participate by tweeting at Live Politico, and you can also ask questions on Slido using hashtag #EnergyVisions, and then you have to select a room called Politico Spotlight. If you can identify yourself when asking a question, that does help us decide which questions pop up on my tablet so that we can address them. And we will try to make sure that we have enough time to take questions on Slido. We've created a poll as well. So the poll question is it realistic for the EU to plan for a future with no Russian energy? And you can hop on and there's 3 potential answers. You can give those answers as well. Before we get started, we'll hear some opening remarks from our partner, and László Varró, the Vice President of Global Business Environment at Shell. So, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, George. Ladies and gentlemen, I lead a scenario team which was established half a century ago to reflect on uncertainties and try to navigate them. And I think it is fair to say that all those uncertainties are here. in a fashion which is more radical and deeper than any time in the past half a century. If I combine the tragic events unfolding in Ukraine due to the Russian aggression and the unfolding climate crisis, the energy system is generally facing unprecedented uncertainty, and a strategic response will require transforming the energy system at a rate much faster than it has ever changed since the Industrial Revolution. Now, I would like to invite you to reflect on three important aspects of the crisis and the crisis response. One is that the crisis did not come out of thin air. On the 23rd of February, before the Russian tanks started to move, the energy system was already out of equilibrium, it was already stressed, and 2022 was actually shaping up as a volatile year already on the 23rd of February. The second is that the energy system is losing its old and dirty resilience sources, but we have not yet built up the new and clean resiliency sources with a sufficient speed. So right now the energy system is in a dangerous middle ground. And last but not least, there is no doubt that a rapid scale-up of renewable energy is a critical part of the solution. In fact, my vote on the question would not be whether is it realistic to plan a European energy system without Russian energy. It has to be done. Given the realistic assessment of the geopolitical situation, it has to be done. But that rapid scale-up of renewable energy is not a gift from God. It's a result of hard work and effective collaboration. So for the first, why the energy system was already in disequilibrium on the 23rd of February, that's basically the nature of the recovery from the coronavirus crisis, which was highly asymmetrical. The coronavirus crisis was associated with a mighty consumption wave. People went out, spent their money, wanted to enjoy their life, and their consumption expenditure shifted from services to manufactured goods. Your favorite yoga club is still closed down, so you will spend your money ordering a new PlayStation on Amazon. Now, when that happens, then two things will follow, which is often underappreciated. One, that gadget is manufactured more often than not in Asia. So that will drive up coal use and coal-fired electricity generation in Asia, with important spillovers on gas. And then second, the gadget will have to be delivered to the consumer, which will be container shipping, air cargo, highway trucking, all the hard-to-abate components of oil demand. So in the decade before the coronavirus crisis, the global economy had on average, and an energy geek would have told you in the middle of the night if you wake us up, that 3% global GDP growth, 1% growth of global energy consumption with a 2% improvement of energy intensity. And in fact, the European Union was very much active in a global initiative called the 3% Club to accelerate the improvement of the energy intensity of the global economy. Last year was a 6% jump in global GDP, with a 5.8% jump in global energy consumption, with no improvement in the energy intensity of the global economy at all. And whereas we have seen this massive ramp-up of energy consumption, and we also have seen oil and gas investment being cut by roughly half in the past 5 years, and as the oil and gas industry is adjusting its investment to an energy transition pathway, the clean energy investment, which is sufficient to actually put fossil fuel demand in that declining trajectory, is somewhere around 3 times higher than what we observe in real life. And a good illustration is Vestas, a company whom I greatly admire, and it's a genuine European clean energy success story. Last year, Vestas was the biggest wind turbine manufacturer in the global economy. Now, if you buy every single Vestas wind turbine that Vestas manufactured last year and you install them, you reduce gas use in the electricity sector by around 10 billion cubic meters. Global gas demand is 4,000, and before the crisis, it was growing at 100 per year. So even iconic, very successful companies would need to scale up their activities very, very significantly. And this asymmetry between a robust recovery of energy demand and clean energy investment, which is struggling to scale up, this actually meant that already before the Russian invasion, energy markets were tightening. European gas markets were already crazy in December, and that asymmetry, that disequilibrium was already there in the system. Now, the second major point is the loss of resiliency, and there it's very instructive to compare the crisis management 10 years ago, when Japan lost nuclear power after Fukushima, with the crisis management today. building a new liquefied natural gas project is around 4 years and $10 billion. So in the short term, if somebody wants to buy more LNG, somebody else has to buy less. 10 years ago in Japan, Japan still had old, inefficient, and dirty but functioning oil-fired power plants, which ramped up. Europe still had a fair number of old, dirty, but functioning coal-fired power plants, which also ramped up. And at that time, there was still energy partnership with Russia. So when you run the numbers, the lost Japanese nuclear was replaced by fuel oil in Japan, Russian pipeline gas delivered to Europe, and coal burned in European coal-fired power plants. And this was done in a quite flexible manner. Now, these old flexibility sources are going out from the system. This is unavoidable in the context of the energy transition. But one of the most striking features of the crisis is that since the war started, gas-fired power generation in Europe is actually up year on year, because Europe lost substantial nuclear production because of the technical problems in France. Europe lost substantial hydro production because of the climate impact. So gas was the last line of defense, and it had to run at whatever market circumstances. And this is not the last time when the energy system is subject to technical, geopolitical, or weather-related shocks. History is not over. So whereas the old flexibility is not going to be returning, the new flexibility sources, either the digital solutions or hydrogen or electricity storage, have not yet reached anywhere near the critical mass. And this is a very dangerous middle ground. And then last but not least, the scale-up of renewables, which would have been necessary from a climate and energy transition point of view, but it is a very appropriate strategic response to the energy crisis as well. Now, what do you need if you suddenly want to build more renewables? Well, you need one thing which, in my view, is not a problem, and that is money. There is a very strong investor appetite in the private sector for renewable projects. I'm deeply skeptical about the idea of European Union funding to wind and solar projects. Residential solar projects in remote regions for poor families, that's an entirely legitimate thing. But for the big business, heavy-duty wind and solar generation, the capital is easily available. However, even after your money, you still need 3 more things. One, you need the equipment. You need the kit. And right now in the wind industry, every single wind turbine manufacturer is complaining about supply chain shortages, increasing price of steel, chip shortages, logistical bottlenecks, and so on, a long list of complaints. And by the way, every single wind turbine manufacturer reports a declining order intake in Europe, which is a very worrying sight. Whereas in the case of solar, solar is doing extremely well. But in the first decade of the solar revolution, the transformative success of solar was the transformative success of outsourcing to China. China is around 85% of the global solar supply chain. And how the solar supply chain will be managed in the evolving geopolitical relationship between China, Europe, and the United States is something that remains to be seen. Then after the equipment, you need the people. You need people who have electrotechnician skills and who are comfortable working on the top of a 100-meter size steel structure. So there's a major role for reskilling and training and establishing the green energy workforce in Europe. And then last but not least, you also need a legal permission to build things. And on a personal note, I spent a decade in Paris at the International Energy Agency, where I failed to put solar panel on top of our house because of a small chateau originally built for one of the illegitimate sons of Louis XV, which is less than 2 kilometers from our house, and apparently because of some cultural heritage regulations that prevented me from putting up a solar panel. I think European political decision makers have to ask the question that are such regulations, and it shouldn't be unfair to the French cultural heritage regulations, this is a European scale problem all across the board. And I think European political decision makers have to ask the question that when we face a combined energy crisis and climate crisis, what is the appropriate legal environment that helps this scale up? So to sum it up, all of these 3 things, the equipment and supply chains, the skilled labor and workforce and permitting, are issues which require effective collaboration between the private sector and policymakers. From our point of view, we are all in, and we are very happy to continue this journey. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laszlo. Really interesting speech. Thank you. Before we jump into the discussion, I would like to flag that Politico does strive for gender balance. This will look a little bit like a manual, but it wasn't supposed to be. We did have female guests who unfortunately had to drop out, but we are aware and we do try to make sure that our panels are properly gender balanced. I'd like to invite the panelists taking part in the discussion today. Dries Akke, the Policy Director at Solar Power Europe, Bernd Kupker, Policy Officer with DG Ener, Jonas Helseth, the Director of Bologna Europe, and Morten Helveg Petersen, who is a Danish MEP with Renew Europe and a member of the ITRE committee. Thanks very much. I'd like to both in the chat before we started and in it was pretty clear in Laszlo's opening remarks as well that we do face a very uncomfortable 2 or so year crunch to try to get to this greener, more renewable future. So maybe I'll just sort of ask the panel, what's the most effective way of getting through these next 2 years without collapsing our economy?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. I mean, this is a very broad and difficult question, obviously. I think Laszlo touches upon a lot of the stuff that we need to, I mean, not only reflect on, but to act on. And for sure, in terms of deployment of renewables, permitting is a big stumbling block, has been. This was, politically speaking, dead in the water prior to 24th of February. Now we are finally somewhat succeeding, at least in terms of getting permitting back on the table with the revision of the Renewables Directive, which is going to be adopted this fall. So on a very, very sad background, things are moving in terms of permitting, at least. Now, to me, it seems like things that used to be as politically unsexy as energy efficiency and buildings are now, for obvious reasons, sad reasons, becoming security politics. And these are measures that we can adopt and implement on the very short term. So for me, this has to be given priority. All has priority, but these are at least some of them that we need to move fast on, and faster than we've managed to do so far.
Bernd, how do you see these next 2 years?
Well, obviously, it will be a huge challenge. I mean, we are in a disruption which is unprecedented for our recent history, at least. And there's a need of short-term measures as necessary as long-term measures. And the solutions were already kind of all mentioned before. I mean, in the short term, we need to look to switch both at diversification of energy sources, as well as short-term measures for energy savings. That's very important. But at the same time, we do need to do everything to bring then, for the long term, all the necessary regulatory framework in place, which allows us then to switch to clean energy and to achieve long-term energy savings. And these measures will come, so I would be very optimistic. I mean, with the packages which are discussed, this is out of question, but these long-term measures take a bit longer. They will not have an immediate effect, so we need both the short-term measures in the markets, I mean, which are discussed currently, as well as all this policy framework, which is more or less a scale-up of the Fit for 55 proposals, which are already on the table.
Do you get a sense of increased urgency, that the scale and the tempo of the discussion is different than before February 24th?
Of course. I mean, we already saw an increase of the urgency, which increased over the time. I mean, I started to work on renewables in 2012. where it was discussed, or in 2014, we wanted to aim at 27% renewables in 2030. This was already increased because renewables were not sexy at the time. They were perceived to be too expensive. We had the first experiences with having support schemes for solar, which were unfortunately a bit too expensive at the time. So there was a lot of pressure. But then we stepped this up, and now we're going one step further. But we're also encountering new problems because the permitting questions was not so much a challenge in the past. It has become a challenge over the more recent years, also for some good reasons, because if we have to roll out renewables, obviously there are questions to be solved where we put these renewables, but we need to solve this better than in the past to speed this up to the necessary level.
Great, thank you. Jonas, how do you see this 2-year, I guess, canyon that we need to scramble across?
I'm quite worried, but I like the way you posed your question, because I think there's a key point in there, which is how do we do this in a way that avoids collapsing the economy? And there are a few signs that we see that are quite worrying in that respect. And just maybe it's a bit of a flashback to the winter of 2009, when the Commission was talking a lot about the trilemma of energy security, energy cost, and climate. And it seems like not so much has changed, apart from that we are in a much worse situation on every front. That was very much in the context of when the Russians turned off the gas through Ukraine. And now we are in an extreme situation with the war and with the volume going up on every front. And that comes with a risk that rush decisions are taken that aren't always evidence-based. And when it comes to the amount of money that is now, being quoted for going into investments in renewables, that's fantastic, and that's what we've been fighting for years, and what we want to see more of. But this is public money, and it is necessary. Not all of it is public money. A lot of it is necessary that public money is spent in a way that gives bangs for bucks. And what does that mean in practice? It means what we've been talking about all of those years, but not really been doing, efficiency first. And efficiency first, in the context of renewables, means you use the electricity directly wherever you can. So when the renewables are being rolled out on a massive scale, that's a great thing, but it isn't always being used in a sensible way, which means that we don't actually get impact on the 3 things we're trying to achieve. 1, getting off Russian gas as soon as possible. 2, cutting emissions. And 3, making sure we don't increase energy costs for consumers and businesses in Europe even further. And some of the things we see playing now, including in the RePower EU, and we'll probably get back to that later in the conversation, I see some risks that are doing exactly the opposite. So the focus on investment into hydrogen is not a bad thing in itself, right. But if hydrogen isn't treated as what it is, an energy carrier, rather than an energy source, we are going to end up in a bad problem. So look at the Fit for 55 package. Great, we're increasing the ambition on renewable energy. That's what we want. But people are also talking about increasing the ambition on renewable hydrogen. But that's not an energy carrier. It is just a way to use that renewable electricity. So if we have a higher ambition on renewable hydrogen in the proposals, it doesn't mean that we get more renewables, unless we get ensured that there is additional renewables to provide that hydrogen. And I think we'll get back to that. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. That's hydrogen is going to be a big thing that we'll address in a second. Dries, how do you see this problem? And we've been obviously writing a lot of stories at Politico about what's the sort of energy crunch coming on, and it does seem, especially sort of the more when you look at applications for government subsidies for especially domestic rooftop solar, that they've doubled or even tripled in many countries, because there's just a huge rush of people trying to jump onto that. Is that happening fast enough to actually make a difference, or is the scale just not where we need to be?
Yeah, so it's absolutely true, and thanks for the question. So solar is having a record-breaking year. we will be able to report on numbers of 40 gigawatts of newly added solar PV capacity in this year. That's more than double than 2 years ago. So it's an absolute record. A lot of that is in the rooftop segments, because people know, companies know that's one way to hedge themselves against this electricity price and energy price madness is to have solar on their roofs. So the economics are quite clear. People are rushing for it, and we're basically installing as many solars as the installer bottleneck allows us to. If we had 100% more installers, we would deploy 100% more solar. That's how simply as it is. Now, maybe just to come back to your question on the 2 years, because I think, as Jonas said, I like the framing as well, because we have a bit of an issue with timing and terminology. We tend to speak about short-term and long-term. And there is something in the middle too, and we tend to forget that. Short-term means emergency. It's like saving households and industries and companies, the European economy, from breakdown, from bankruptcy, if you put it that way. And that is what is taking up, understandably, a lot of the political attention for the moment with different packages. But then people immediately shift to long-term. The energy transition will then be a long-term reply or a response. What we need is that 1, 2, 3 year perspective. We can make a massive difference also on a 1 year, 2 year perspective by boosting the rollout of efficiency and renewables. It's very concrete. I am still waiting for that emergency package on the renewables and efficiency booster. Where is that? Why is there no Article 122, to use a technical term, like an emergency package on deploying renewables? That's where the political attention should be being. And there's some very concrete things you can do. For example, permitting. You can ask member states to define go-to areas or priority areas or emergency areas within 3 months of next year, like by March next year. This would be completely appropriate to the challenge and the emergency that we're into. You can push repowering on the wind side, but also on the solar side. If you repower solar panels, it's the same size. They're not twice as big like the wind turbines. The efficiency is plus 30%, all free, new renewables for free. And there's a couple of more examples, like, for example, emergency auctions. Every member state should do 3, 4 emergency auctions of solar plus storage or renewables plus storage that immediately compete with gas peakers by June. I'm just saying, why is this not on the table? Because we're limited to symptom fighting rather than root cause fighting for the moment.
Very good questions. Why don't we ask our political representatives as to where these issues are and why they're not happening faster?
Well, there's always an election going on somewhere in Europe, meaning that you will always, at any point in time, have extreme sensitivities out there given spike in energy prices. I mean, the basic fact that now, 3-4 weeks after European Council getting together for the first time, trying to agree on some of the measures, still not having reached an agreement on this, just demonstrates how sensitive this is. I think it's a great idea. I think I would be all for it, sort of a emergency package. I'm so old, so I can remember playing in the streets of Copenhagen back in '73 with no cars on it. And I think it is something similar in terms of mindset that we have to adopt. So things are moving too slow. We do not have the necessary sense of urgency given what is hitting us out there now. So it is extremely complicated, and we basically need to speed things up even further that we've managed to do so.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, you would think that in the current political environment that national issues which you see in places like in Bavaria or in Poland when it comes to onshore wind, that's just less of a factor because you can now cloak it in national security, response to the Russian invasion. But so you think that this is still an impediment, that there's domestic political resistance to dramatically speeding the uptake of renewables?
Yes, I'm sorry to say so, but these are also real-life politics and policy implications. When you fight election campaigns, these are short-term in nature, and they ought to be, obviously, in a perfect world, long-term. But that is very hard to do. I think one of the many things that we've gotten wrong or haven't managed to do in the right way is that in many countries all over Europe, we basically subsidize further consumption rather than basically subsidizing savings. And this we ought to do in a much larger scale in order to avoid what seems to happen now, that we are still overly dependent on imports from Russia. So this is a thing that we have to deal with, that's been going on, like I'd say addicts, like gas addicts having to wean off. And this has been going on for decades. And our political challenge is how to overcome this in a matter of a year or two, which is obviously just telling of the magnitude of the challenge that we're all facing.
Bernd, is the Commission engaged in this? Is there going to be some effort to deal with some of these questions, just to speed up the permitting process, the sort of approach to ramping up renewables?
Well, of course, I mean, the Commission has made proposals how to deal with this, but I guess this falls under the category of long-term measures. But normally these are complex questions which also need to be implemented, and Europe normally applies a certain process to adopt European legislation, to make long-term frameworks, so that every institution can be completely taken into account, and that it is not rushed. So this is an interesting subject. I mean, a question which could be assessed. But I mean, first of foremost, we started with the process to address this in legislation in order to get this going. And obviously, the member states are always able now, and it is their interest, because the member states are in this situation to do now everything immediately to improve these processes. And
you have a sense that there is a shift in opinion among member states when you're dealing with them, that the resistance or the roadblocks that existed before are coming down or shifting?
Of course, there's a huge difference. And as I tried to already explain this before, this is a huge shift in perception of renewables. Before, it was considered to be expensive. There was lots of reduction. This is completely gone. So renewables are now cheaper. So all this barrier to the promotion of renewables as a cost driver, that's over. And I don't think this will come back. And therefore, this resistance is gone, and everyone wants to address the problems. But with permitting, I mean, there are different aspects. There are citizens involved, and you have this question whether there is a wind park close to your house, whether you want to have that. So there is something like resistance, and creative thinking needs to be in place. How to overcome this resistance in a democracy, to maintain then the switch. But this crisis also helps to create awareness that this is necessary. So I'm very positive that we will make big strides, but it cannot go quickly enough. I mean, everything needs to be quicker and ramped up.
Exactly, it needs to be quicker.
Yeah.
That's the issue, is that sort of the normal slow political process is not maybe the best time. We've dealt with some of the political sort of pinch points. Some of the panelists raised other capacity issues. Jonas, could you maybe talk about some of the other problems that are out there in moving faster on this? Once you get through the political problems, what else is stopping a faster uptake of renewables?
Well, so I probably should use the opportunity to commend the Commission a bit on what has been proposed on permitting, because I think that's very clearly the key area where things have been held back. And perhaps also part of the reason why we end up in the conundrum we are, where things are going too slow. So permitting has to be dealt with, has to be dealt with on a European level, has to be dealt with also on regional member state level as soon as possible. But if you allow me, I'm going to bang a little bit more on the hydrogen drum. Because I think, the points that were made here about avoiding boosting consumption is absolutely critical. And all of us are rightly told at the moment to save energy. And we are my colleague Marta, who is our hydrogen expert, can confirm that we're sitting in a cold office those days trying to save gas. I should probably do something about it soon. But we have to save energy, and that goes for everyone, also for public authorities. And what we see at the moment is that billions of euros are being proposed as investments into electrolyzers. Electrolyzers to produce renewable hydrogen. That is an enormous boost of energy demand. We are talking, the figures in Fit for 55, which we're now talking about boosting even further, those figures amount to something along the lines of the energy production in France, the entire energy production in France. In electrolyzer capacity, driving demand in a crisis where people are struggling to pay for electricity bills. We have to ask the question, is that a good plan? And if we're going to do this, are we really going to do it on the back of consumers? Or are we going to make sure that at least it comes along with a massive additional investment in renewable electricity production? Because otherwise, it just cannibalizes, as I said before, the proposed renewable rollout that is already there, without any renewable electricity capacity being left over for decarbonizing the grid and reducing the cost for consumers and helping us get off Russian gas. And that is, for me, absolutely incomprehensible. But it's summed up again by what seems to be a very common misunderstanding, that hydrogen is an energy source. It is not. It is an energy carrier that we need energy to produce. And the energy loss in producing hydrogen is substantial. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We know that there are many sectors that need hydrogen.
That's exactly it. There are sectors where apparently hydrogen is going to have to be used that are very difficult to decarbonize. I guess steel, cement, long-distance transport. There's a whole bunch of aviation where hydrogen will probably play a fairly large role. So you can't avoid that.
I agree, but I think, well, I would question some of the sectors you mentioned. I think there is a certain hype around hydrogen. I think there's a lot of sectors that are subscribing to it. There's a lot of people who have been calling themselves hydrogen ready for the future, planning to run on gas. Most of those sectors will now have a problem because there is no gas. But we will need some hydrogen. We have to make sure that there is additionality. I would like to also commend Mr. Pedersen on voting against the Parliament amendment to drop the requirement for additionality for renewables for hydrogen production. I see our hosts here at Shell are nodding. I would like also some of the oil and gas folks to maybe speak more openly about this. But of course, we know that if we don't have additionality and we don't get more renewables, what do we end up with? We end up with a higher demand on the existing grid, which includes gas, the little that's left, coal that can be turned on to run these things, and a massive increase in emissions. So this is one of the key things that needs to be fixed. And I don't see, at the moment, the European Union on a good path to fixing it. Thank you.
That's actually one of the questions we have on Slido. What is your take on taking out the additionality requirement in the EU green hydrogen rules that are now being discussed? Maybe, Morten, we can get your take on that.
I think I'd be more or less on the lines of what Jonas is just saying on this, given the sensitivities in this. But clearly, it's a big discussion out there, but I think I would be more or less in line with what was being mentioned here.
Right. Dries, do you see this hydrogen issue? Is that something that impacts solar planning and the way that you address it?
Most definitely. Yeah. So we are keeping a very close eye on the hydrogen hype. There's no doubt that there's a hype. We are part of a coalition on renewable hydrogen, and it's very obvious. It's completely meaningless to talk about hydrogen without it being renewable. Like, why are we even talking about something else? we are creating a molecule to replace fossil molecules. So that can only be renewable.
So the whole blue hydrogen thing is just not happening, basically.
No,
right.
no, of course.
Right.
That's why we need the additionality delegated. I mean, it's called renewable hydrogen. So there's two words, first renewable, then hydrogen. That's the way we should be talking about this. There's no such a thing as accelerating hydrogen without solving the bottlenecks on the solar and wind deployment sides. And I fully comment or echo what Jonas has said and also what Martin has said. the delegated act for additionality is essential. Yeah? And we hope to bring it back with clear and strong rules, monthly matching to beginning, but moving to hourly matching. Sorry for the technicalities, because otherwise, yeah, there's no reason why we would do hydrogen at all. And then, of course, there's the end use. So I think there's a lot of people that are quite happy to confuse the conversation of where to best use hydrogen and give messages around blending hydrogen in gas networks, even on the residential level. Well, if you want to create energy poverty, you use hydrogen for heating. Yeah? So it's almost, you could say, okay, some of these companies, gas TSOs, are defending their business model, but at the same, it's almost like, yeah, they're almost complacent or complicit into actually creating more energy poverty. So I think this should be put to bed. We need hydrogen. It has to be renewable, and it's for specific sectors only.
Jonas, you wanted to?
Yeah, just one quick comment on that, because I very much appreciate what you said, Dries, and I would just like to say also thank you for using the term renewable hydrogen rather than green hydrogen. I think the color coding that is going around the hydrogen conversation is not helping anyone. Okay. And now we hear about purple hydrogen from nuclear, whatever. It has to be a conversation about renewable hydrogen, and that means we need to ensure that there is renewable electricity capacity to produce that hydrogen, otherwise it's not renewable. And when the Commission is talking about, and the Commission has been dragging its feet on defining what green hydrogen means, that is exactly because that. How do we make sure that there is that renewable additional capacity to produce it? So I hope we're going to see a clear position from the Commission soon on this. Thank you.
Bernd, you shook your head at that, yeah.
Okay, I mean, it is clear the Commission, I mean, that's a very important subject. And we are there in a situation that everyone knows that hydrogen is absolutely necessary to achieve carbon neutrality, because there are sectors which simply rely on hydrogen. And there are little other sources apart from biomass, and biomass is very limited as a resource. And it also takes time to build this up. So what needs to be done is to initiate this industry, and there we need to find the right balance to not have too strict criteria in the beginning to make it run. But on the other hand, it is obviously absolutely true that this needs to be supported by additional renewable hydrogen production, and the whole production needs to be integrated into the whole energy system. So the Commission has there prepared rules, draft rules, based on the current Renewable Energy Directive, and has also not proposed to change this approach. So it was considered that this should remain the same. However, now we are in a situation that the Parliament has voted and to remove these rules, or at least not to remove these, but to have different rules, and also to withdraw the empowerment of the Commission to set out these rules. And this is something the Commission also cannot ignore, and therefore we are reaching out to the Parliament and to stakeholders what should now be done. And we will go now into trilogues, and hopefully this will be solved very quickly. But the Commission cannot just ignore that there is a different political situation at the moment.
I've also got a direct question for you from one of our watchers. Would you support a CHIPS Act equivalent for solar PV manufacturing in Europe?
To me?
Yeah.
It's not something I have thought much about. This would need to be carefully assessed. I mean, we rely on imports, but however, in order to boost production, I mean, also we have an open trade relationship, and we can rely it, and it accelerates the promotion of renewables and the installation, if we can rely also on our international partners for imports of these technologies. And a large part of the investment still takes place in Europe. You put all these solar roofs on the roof, you have all the equipment around it. The European industry is still involved in producing equipment to produce to panels, but the panel production itself is not very strong here. But I'm not
Right.
the expert on solar, so maybe this I
Right.
would prefer than maybe to
Right.
the colleague from South.
Morten, you wanted to?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I think that might be a useful thing to consider, given that what we're discussing these days and times is renewables in general becoming of strategic interest for Europe to deploy faster and further and speeding up permits and what have you. And that would apply to PV obviously, but also to offshore wind, for example, where this leadership that we've had in my country, Denmark, but in Europe at large, is not to be taken for given or granted, given what's happening in China or other places in the world. So I think there's a lot to be said for having a strategic priority, also for the industrial perspectives in having a very, very competitive renewables industrial cluster in Europe. So, I mean, the short answer is yes. And if I may just add one thing to, alluding to what Laszlo was saying initially, in terms of equipment and supply chains. I mean, this we have to take very seriously in Europe. If not, I mean, we'll be losing out. So I think there's so much to be said in initiatives along those lines. And adding to this, I think we all acknowledge the sense of urgency in the short term on what's going on in integrating renewables and what's happening on our electricity markets and what have you. So I think there's a lot of reason for intervening in the short term. What we have to be very careful about is the structural issues and the long-term issues when interfering in the markets, because I think there's a lot to be said positively about the deregulation that we've succeeded in doing over the last 10, 20 years in terms of integrating renewables. So let's be careful not throwing the baby out with the dirty bathwater when discussing short-term, long-term issues, not least when it comes to regulating markets.
That's interesting because there is, I sort of mentioned at the beginning as well, is this Europe had in retrospect, a very dangerous and unhealthy dependency on Russian energy. There is a sense that this rush to go green as fast as possible could create other dependencies on technology or other things. So the big one is obviously solar panels, largely manufactured in China. Dries, is that fine? Do we just say we need speed and China is the only place that really does this at scale, so we have to just completely rely on China? Or does that create future geopolitical tensions or dependencies or dangers for the EU?
No, we have to take this absolutely seriously. So I think the key word here is diversification. We need to diversify global solar PV supply chains and many other critical supply chains as well. So you need to think about this question in a global setting. So we were extremely happy as Solar Power Europe, because we've been asking for it for many, many years, that the Commission, as well as part of its solar strategy, has a target for bringing back a certain part of solar PV manufacturing to Europe. At least 20 gigawatts by 2025, and maybe more in the future. Finally, there's attention to the supply chain, so we wholly welcome that. There's an alliance linked to that that will soon be launched. Now, of course, the rest of the world thinks about that as well, and it feels that we are taking in speed a little bit. So India has a very assertive industrial policy for solar PV manufacturing since a couple of months. What happened in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act is a game changer on every level. I'm not sure whether this is trickling down enough in the European debate, but we basically have a transatlantic partner who does a generous, assertive industry policy not seen in the world for decades. So the question is Europe already losing the train or missing the boat on this important topic? It probably will have to stand up and speed up. This morning there was a letter from 13 of the CEOs of our solar companies, of our members, making this exact point. Europe is at risk of missing the boat on the solar PV supply chain, and will need to come with additional and new instruments beyond current instruments like the innovation funds or what have you. That's not going to do it. So we are in favor of a solar acts like the CHIPS Act. Yeah.
It's interesting what you mentioned on the American Act, and you certainly get a sense that people have not fully, maybe even in the States, certainly in Europe, haven't grasped the scale of what the Americans have done. And until now, it was the Europeans were able to be sort of comfortable. We're far ahead. We're much more ambitious. The Americans are lagging. That's not the case at all. The Americans are way ahead. And some of the assessments that you see out of the States is the vast infusion of cash will actually drive their transition much faster than even the American calculations account for. So I think that Europe is really staring both at an industrial and an energy challenge based on the US Act.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I may just actually back to your question earlier about what is it that holds us back. And there was one more thing I should have mentioned there, which is actually, I think, absolutely critical, but it's very little conversation around it in Europe, and that is electricity grids. And that's back to what I was talking about before. We need efficiency. We need to make sure that the renewables that we build are actually used directly wherever it's possible, because that's many times more efficient than using it for any other purpose. And that means, in most cases, building grid connections, often also across borders in Europe. And the reason for that is that very often the demand center that we have today, let's think about industry. You mentioned steel and chemical clusters, for example, that will need hydrogen. But they also need electricity to decarbonize quicker. And those demand centra are not, in most cases, in the places where we have the big renewable potential. They are often far from that because they were built in the past in places where there was abundant coal. Now we need to make sure we have the grid connections. I would like to see a European plan for grids, for grid investments that make us enable us to actually use the renewables efficiently. But I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask a question to the Commissioner here.
It's a relaxed panel. Go right ahead.
Cool. So yesterday I had a conversation with the Director General of DG GROW, Mrs. Jonah, and I asked a question about, does the Commission have some kind of assessment of what it would mean for electricity costs and emissions if the additionality requirement for renewable hydrogen is dropped, which is currently what the Parliament has proposed, and which means we will add, as I said, energy demand, electricity demand on the scale of France's production in the grid until 2030. It's a very short period of time. Is there an assessment of what that means in terms of additional emissions from the coal and gas that we're going to turn on to produce that, and electricity costs for consumers? And she referred, Mrs. Jonah referred to DG Energy and said, you got to ask those guys. So here we are.
I mean, it is a challenging question because it depends on the assumptions. If you have a lot of regulatory frameworks in place, you have, for instance, the ETS, which covers and caps emissions, and therefore, if you just increase electricity demand, this has a consequence. So we have a rule in Article 7 of the Renewable Energy Directive, or in the proposed article, which reduces, or which takes into account efficiency losses of conversion of electricity into hydrogen. Therefore, in order to achieve the targets, you need to increase electricity production. So knowing exactly what the impact is if you drop the additional rule is very difficult. What is known if you would really not do it? So we would just produce more hydrogen, and there was not, then it would be a huge impact on emissions, on more fossil fuels. But whether the market and all the framework you have around to which degree it compensates for these rules is more harder to tell. So I don't think we have any figure which says this would be the effect, because it is an assessment of its own, and it depends very much on the assumptions you take, how well is this whole integrated into the grid.
Thanks. We have this is an issue that I want to address as well. Gunhild Rigstad from Sintef Energy Research asks, studies show that until 2050 we need to invest in renewable technologies at unprecedented speed. what is realistic in terms of materials and getting the job done? This is something that was addressed a little bit of how much of a crunch are we facing in materials, and especially in skills, in labor, to get this moving at speed, or is this again falling into this 2-year canyon? By the time you get people trained and ready to go, we're talking 2024. Idris.
Yeah, I'm happy to give some background on that. So first of all, from a solar point of view, when it comes to raw materials, equipment, there's not that much of an issue. There's no hard bottlenecks there. There's challenges, prices go up. In some places, polysilicon is something that we need a lot of course, but you see a reaction from the markets. Solar is booming everywhere in the world, so there's a reaction from the market in terms of investing in those supply chains. So there's no hard bottleneck there. We have more of a bottleneck when it comes to the installers, as I mentioned before, hands to mount solar. Now, these are not unovercomable problems at all. You can train people in a matter of weeks to have the skills to connect solar panels and an inverter. This is not rocket science. So it all comes down to political attention and prioritization. Like, what are the problems for the energy transition? This, and you can tackle each of them with very clear solutions that are proven. So for me, this is really the key of the question that you're asking about, the 2 years perspective. If we're not going to take care of the essence of the solution, then obviously you will create a dynamic where renewables are only a long-term answer. But that's the whole point. It can also be a shorter term, as in a 2-year time frame, if the political attention is committed to tackling some of these obstacles. There's nothing that is unovercomable.
Morten, what are the political roadblocks in getting this done? It would seem like a bit of a no-brainer. You create employment, you shift people into these new jobs. What are the obstacles?
Well, labor shortage is a real issue. It's not only within the PV or renewables. It also applies to efficiency or buildings or what have you. And this is all over Europe. I mean, this is a huge challenge, again, that we all face in upskilling, but also very sensitive issues like legal migration will come into play here in order to cater to the needs in terms of ramping up deployment of renewables looking at 2050. And adding to this, coming back to the policy framework, I think we will have soon also serious discussions on predictability, stability, because I would agree on the point made previously that private money is out there wanting to invest, but a prerequisite for this is to ensure some sort of stability and predictability also in terms of the electricity markets and what we remunerate. But labor shortages are real critical issues that we have to look into. And you'd have widely differing practices all over the various member states on how to do this, which just makes it even more complicated. But in the big picture, real problem, real.
So should there be some sort of an EU-wide approach that narrows these national differences, that makes it?
I wouldn't go that far, because obviously each member state has its own tradition and culture and way to do it. But I think there's a lot to be said in terms of, say, the buildings directive, which we're negotiating right now, that you have some sort of standardization so it is recognizable what we are doing and trying to achieve. So there's a lot to be said, I think, in terms of some sort of harmonization or standardization for this, in order also for labor to be able to move more freely across borders and employ what skills they would have in a national setting.
Great. I'd like to come back a little bit to the original question, which has this Russian element in it. Do you think that there is any scenario in which, if the war ends, that this green speed up would lose impetus, and people would go like, wow, the Russians are back on the market, we've got more access to gas, let's turn on that one remaining strand of Nord Stream that hasn't been blown up yet, and we can take much more time now. Or is this a fundamental shift that no matter what happens with Russia, that the EU is like a junkie, is going to drop that gas syringe and not go back to it?
Well, yeah, I really hope and work for 24 hours, 24/7, that this is a wake-up call. So this transition has to move forward, even after war might be over. So yeah, absolutely.
Bern?
I would agree. I mean, all the legal frameworks are set out in the direction of the energy transition. So in a way, this crisis pushes us to go more in this direction, but if this pushes over, there's no reverse. So, I mean, there will be still fossil fuel use for a while, this is certain, but that there is a kind of a turn back, this I would find very unlikely.
So Russia has basically killed sort of medium and long term its market in Europe. No one is going to go back and start buying Russian fuels.
Well, I mean, they can also diversify themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, this situation is unpredictable. What happens? We don't know when this war will stop. Other buyers might be there for the gas, but I think Europe will not be there to hail, Russian fossil energy imports, and certainly not under this government.
Jonas, do you agree with that? That this is that's just not an issue anymore. That of a return of Russian energy imports.
Well, it depends on how we play it, and I think it's definitely possible to get off Russian gas for good. And you might be aware of a report that we did with some other organizations before the summer, EMBER and Regulatory Affairs Project and E3G, where we looked into how we can do that, and the answer is given. Avoid the hype, use the renewables that we roll out efficiently, which means electrify, 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 and don't waste it on inefficient processes. And in the most efficient investment in most cases is going to be installing heat pumps. We need more heat pumps to replace gas in heating and cooling, and everywhere in Europe that is going to be an effective investment. But we don't see sufficient push for that. Instead, we see a push for hydrogen, which we are going to need in some cases, but which currently is a hype across the economy, and that is where we have the risk of the economy collapsing if that we throw all our eggs in that basket.
Okay. Dries, is this essentially a one-way bet on renewables, that Russian energy is not going to be a future factor?
Yeah, we don't have a glass ball, of course, but I think it's quite clear that, I mean, this is the way I see it, and to refer back to Laszlo as well, the 21st century has started. Yeah. The geopolitics are quite clearly going to be redefined across energy lines. So we're talking about the energy transition that used to be a climate imperative, now being a security imperative and a competitiveness imperative. All that together. The European industry is at risk of, the tissue is at risk of unraveling in front of our eyes. So it's basically, it will be a renewables-based prosperity, or it will be no prosperity for Europe.
Thank you very much. Our time has come to an end, so I'd like to thank all of the panelists for taking part in today's discussion. I thought that the way that Laszlo framed things at the beginning with that 2-year gap and something that we kind of hit on the panel was really useful, that we have this chasm that we need to scramble across to get to 2024, 2025, where the situation might be quite different, and so the challenge is how to do that without losing our balance. We did put out a poll, and the results, the question was, is it realistic for the EU to plan a future with no Russian energy? And we got 61% of the respondents saying yes, but only if renewables are ramped up, and 27% said yes, the EU should not take any energy from Russia, and 12% said it's unrealistic to buy no fossil fuels from Russia. I'd again like to thank the speakers, you, the audience, for taking part in person, online, and for sending questions via Slido, and finally to our partner Shell for making this event possible. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please feel free to email us about the event at live@politico.eu. And you can also check our Politico events website for the latest lineup on our events happening this year, and that's politico.eu/events. And for people in the room, we invite you to take part in a networking reception. There is a upcoming Energy Visions event in December. Agat, remind me what we're talking about. The carbon removal gamble in December. So come on for that as well. Thank you very much for taking part, and enjoy the buffet. Thank you.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.